We have breaking news now. Key rulings at hearing for Charlie Kirk's accused assassin. The judge has just ruled. Now, remember, two things at stake, the gag order and the death penalty. The judge has just ruled that a prosecutor did, in fact, violate a gag order and also denied a defense request to take the death penalty off the table. Matt Finn is there with the latest. Matt.
Hi, Harris. Judge Graff just found one of the Utah County prosecutors, Chris Ballard, in contempt for violating the court's pretrial publicity order. Now, Tyler Robinson's defense was asking for the death penalty to be removed from the case as punishment, but Judge Graff declined, saying it's grossly misproportionate to the misconduct. Instead, Judge Graff said that this is a civil contempt and the state is going to have to pay fees. Now, not long after Charlie Kirk was killed last September, the court issued a gag order. But since then, prosecutor Chris Ballard communicated with the media multiple times. Robinson's defense argued that Ballard violated the gag order when he did media interviews about an ATF report. Tyler Robinson's defense previously said that that ATF ballistic report shows that a bullet fragment recovered from the autopsy cannot be conclusively matched to Tyler Robinson's rifle. Well, Ballard argues that Robinson's defense has been mischaracterizing that report, and so the prosecution claims its communications with the press are not breaching the gag order, rather, quote, correcting the record. Judge Graff agreed on that matter.
A false media narrative asserting that the murder weapon has been definitively forensically excluded constitutes substantial undue prejudice to the prosecution. Mr. Ballard's statements explaining the forensic mechanical definition of an inconclusive test were narrowly tailored to mitigate this specific prejudice.
Now, on a separate topic, Judge Graff did rule that Ballard is in contempt and violated the gag order. That is a statement that Ballard made to TMZ about the strength of the state's case. The judge said that that was unnecessary and implied guilt.
What's up, family? Real talk. The judge in the Charlie Kirk assassination trial just dropped the hammer. The prosecutor got caught violating the gag order. The defense tried to use it to kill the death penalty, and the judge said no, as you guys just heard. So let me break this all the way down in plain English. This ain't a whodunit. Everybody with a sense knows Tyler Robinson did this. The real question is whether he gets life in prison or whether the death penalty applies. And that's the actual fight happening in that courtroom. That's what matters. But what you're seeing online is a flood of conspiracy theories and people pushing narratives about the gun not matching. People saying the government's covering something up, creating stories that don't line up with what actually went down at this hearing. And I've been calling this real from the jump. When everybody else was running with theories, I just lay out the facts, man, and let the court of law and things play out before I even give any type of perspective. I like to let the processes play out out of respect for the process when it comes to investigation and et cetera, et cetera. But that's who I am. And this ruling the judge made, it proves everything that can justify why I let the facts play out, because the judge's decision changes how you understand what this case is really about. And I'm breaking it down in plain English so you understand it, not theories, not narratives, just facts. So the ballistic situation is where the lies are thickest right now. The defense and these online commentators keep saying the bullet fragments couldn't be matched to Tyler Robinson's gun. They're twisting inconclusive, quote unquote, to mean the gun's excluded. That's not how forensics works. And I'm about to show you exactly why. Because when those bullets hit Charlie Kirk, they fragmented hard. They broke apart so much inside his body that you can't reconstruct them for normal ballistics testing. You get what I'm saying? The pieces were too damaged to do a proper comparison test. When you can't do a conclusive test, you got to report it as inconclusive. That's just what the word means. But here's the thing people don't understand. Inconclusive does not mean excluded. So let me break down how this actually works. Every gun barrel has its own markings. Think of it like the gun's fingerprint. When a bullet fires through that barrel, the inside markings scratch themselves onto the bullet. Fire from that same gun 100 times, you get the same mark pattern every single time. That's ballistics matching. You take the crime scene bullet, compare the marks to a test fire from the suspect's weapon, And if they line up, you got a conclusive match. With these fragments, they couldn't do that comparison because the pieces were too broken. No clean enough fragment to test fire. So they can't say it matches conclusively. They also can't say it doesn't match. It's inconclusive. So the gun isn't excluded. The testing just couldn't be conclusive. And the prosecution went public explaining this because people were spreading lies saying the gun was ruled out. And that wasn't true. The judge looked at what the prosecution did, explaining the actual definition of what inconclusive means in forensics. And the judge ruled that was reasonable. That was allowed. No gag order violation for explaining basic science. The judge said it straight. He said a false narrative claiming the murder weapon was definitively excluded was causing major prejudice against the prosecution. So when the prosecution corrected it, they were doing their job, and the judge validated that. And that's your foundation for understanding everything else that came out of this hearing. Now, here's where it gets interesting because the judge's ruling on this part tells you everything you need to know about what's really happening in this case. The judge found the prosecution in contempt of court, and let me be clear what that actually means and what it doesn't mean, because the liars online are about to twist this. There were two separate things the judge was looking at, two completely different issues, right? The first one, correcting the ballistic lie. The judge said that was fine, that was necessary. That was the prosecution doing their job. No contempt violation there. I want you to get that straight. The judge looked at what they did and said it was reasonable. The second thing, though, that's where the prosecution slipped up. They did some media interviews and made statements to TMZ about how confident they were in their case, and they said stuff about the strength of their evidence. And the judge said that went too far. That was unnecessary. That was implying guilt when they should have been quiet about it. That's the contempt violation. That's what they got dinged for. And here's what's important to understand. A contempt charge sounds serious. It sounds like a big deal, but what's the actual consequence? The judge said it's a civil contempt situation. There are some fines. There's a more expanded jury selection process happening right now. And that's it. That's the punishment. Compared to what the defense was asking for, removing the death penalty from the table as punishment, the judge said that was grossly disproportionate. He shut that down immediately. He shut it down. So when you see people online saying the prosecution got held in contempt of court, they're going to try to spin it like the whole case is falling apart, and they're going to say the judge is punishing them. And that's not what happened. The judge gave them a slap on the wrist for one statement while validating everything they did that actually matters. The prosecution got hit with minimal consequences while the core of what they did, correcting the false narrative, got the judge's approval. The expanding jury selection process actually works in the prosecution's favor. It means they get more time to make sure they seat jurors who haven't been poisoned by all these conspiracy theories floating around online. More thorough jury screening is good for them, and the prosecution can dig deeper and find people who can actually follow the evidence without being influenced by the lies. And this is a win disguised as a loss if you don't understand what actually happened. And the judge separated the two issues, violated the prosecution's core argument, and gave them minimal punishment while keeping their case intact. And that's exactly what you want if you are the prosecution in this situation.
How does the contempt charge against Chris Ballard, the prosecutor, how does that affect the case? Would they pull him off? Does it do anything else to the prosecution?
I think it'll have no effect whatsoever. And I think the best way to look at this whole thing is this was a win for the prosecution. Yes, they were found in contempt, but they were not found in contempt for the bigger issue about correcting the ATF report. That was really what this was all about, was there was false information out there. The prosecution felt that they had to act and had to act quickly to correct it so it would not create this spun out of control false narrative. And the judge said that that was fine. Where they went too far was by saying, and by the way, we have extreme confidence in this case. That was a little too far for the judge as far as giving their opinions on the strength of evidence. And so it's a slap on the wrist. Really, the remedy here is the judge is going to allow for a more expanded voir dire, which is good anyway. So end of the day, maybe he will get a talking to by his boss, but I doubt this will change things moving forward.
The big news of the day, I would think, though, for prosecutors is the fact that the death penalty stays on the table. Real quick, the significance of the judge's decision today.
Yeah, and the judge even said it was grossly disproportionate to even ask for that as a remedy. The death penalty is going nowhere. That's the important thing. The prosecution can move on as the case was to begin with.
Josh Ritter, thank you very much for being with me on the breaking news.
Thank you.
Family, the real news of the day, the thing that changes everything is what the judge said about the death penalty. And this is where you see the actual stakes of this case laid bare. The defense asked the judge to remove the death penalty as a punishment for the contempt violation, and they were trying to use the contempt charge as a way to get the death penalty off the table. And the judge looked at that request and shut it down fast, and he said it was grossly disproportionate, as you just heard, to ask for a death penalty removal based on a minor contempt violation. He said no. That decision tells you everything about what's really being fought over in this courtroom. And this whole case isn't about whether Tyler Robinson killed Charlie Kirk. Everybody in that room knows what happened. This case is about whether he lives or dies. And that's the real battle. That's what the defense is throwing everything at. Look at their strategy. They fought to keep cameras out of the courtroom. They're fighting the death penalty at every turn. They're trying to control the narrative and limit what the public sees. Why would they do all of that if they're confident in their defense? They wouldn't. They're terrified of the death penalty, and they're trying to do whatever they can to make sure Tyler Robinson doesn't face execution. The prosecution, by contrast, wants everything public. They want the trial televised. They want the evidence out there. They want the truth accessible, and that's a different mindset entirely. And one side wants transparency. The other side wants to hide. And the judge's decision on the death penalty staying on the table is the checkmate moment. And I believe that the transparency should take place because it's a lot of speculation where individuals, if the truth and receipts are not shown, individuals will basically do the he say, she say, and basically make up their own narratives, which we are seeing with the Carmelo Anthony trial. And that judge actually regretted that they didn't televise the whole case. So the defense just lost their biggest bargaining chip. Now they move forward knowing the ultimate consequence is still in play. And this is what people need to understand right now because the conspiracy theories are about to get wild. Look at what the judge's decision actually reveals about who's operating in the light and who's operating in the dark. The defense fought hard to keep cameras out of the courtroom. And if you think about that for a second, if you're defending someone, if you truly believe the government's case is weak and built on lies, why would you fight to keep the public from watching? You want every eye on that courtroom. You want the world to see your brilliant defense, but that's not what they did. They pushed to lock the doors, and they wanted this away from public view. The prosecution did the opposite. They wanted cameras in there and they wanted transparency. They wanted people watching. Now, why would the side that's supposedly covering something up be the ones pushing for maximum public visibility? It doesn't make logical sense. Yet people online are still running with the conspiracy narrative, even though the actions tell a completely different story. Here's the reality about what the government can and can't put out publicly during the active investigation. They got evidence they can't release yet without compromising the case. They got investigative techniques and sources they need to protect. And they got a jury pool they need to keep from being poisoned before trial. That's not a cover up. That's how the legal system actually works. And you try cases in front of a jury, not in front of the internet. And if the prosecution started dumping everything public before trial, they'll get a mistrial and they'll get a hung jury and they'll start all over. And the defense knows this and they're using the strategic advantage of keeping information compartmentalized to create space for the conspiracy theories. And they want people confused and doubting. And that's their defense strategy because they don't have a factual defense. And that's why they're fighting cameras. That's why they're attacking the ballistics. And that's why they're going after contempt violations. And they're throwing everything at the wall because they know what the evidence actually shows. People want to believe there's something hidden. There's something appealing about that idea. It's more interesting than accepting that this was a straightforward act of violence motivated by hatred. But the judge's ruling exposes the contradiction, and the people ask you to believe the government's covering something up are the same people fighting tooth and nail to prevent you from seeing the trial. And that's not accountability, that's not justice, that's obstruction. And the real accountability moment is understanding that fairness sometimes feel uncomfortable, and it means accepting that the system worked. And the judge looked at everything, the ballistics, the contempt violation, the death penalty request, and made rulings based on evidence and law, not politics. And the judge validated what was correct and punished what was out of line, and that's the system functioning. Now, I want to leave you with a little bit of life wisdom that applies when you are a person of faith or just someone who values common sense. So Proverbs chapter 10, verse 9 says, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. So think about what that means in the context of what we just discussed. When you have the truth on your side, you don't have to hide. You don't have to fight to keep the cameras out or twist the meaning of scientific words like inconclusive. Integrity is like a solid balance sheet. It might be under pressure, but the numbers eventually add up and keep you standing. But when you take those crooked paths, when you rely on narratives and shadows, the system eventually catches up to you. You can try to compartmentalize the facts all you want, but the truth has a way of coming to the light. So stay on that straight path, keep your integrity intact, and you'll never have to worry about who's watching the trial of your life. So with no further ado, family, let the love supersede the hate. I'll catch you next one. Hopefully this video added value in your life. On that note, family, make sure you subscribe, turn on your post notifications, give this video a big thumbs up. And on that note, peace.